You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
3CR is radical radio, and that means more than just alternative current affairs and political coverage.
We're radical because we're an independent media outlet, owned and operated by the community.
We're radical because we give communities the control of their own shows, with their own music, in their own languages.
We're radical because we provide a media platform for communities to build their own power to create social change.
Become a subscriber and support Radical Radio. Call us on 03 9419 8377 or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction, in the fields of bodies burning, as the war machine keeps turning, death and hatred to mankind, poisoning their brainwashed mind.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia on the National Community Radio Satellite. Listen to the Anarchist World This Week, Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. Listen to analysis of local, national, international events. Listen to analysis you'll never hear anywhere else.
Welcome to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia by the Community Radio Network. This program is coming to you from the studios of 3CR in Melbourne. My name's Joseph Toscano, and if you wonder what anarchism is all about, anarchos without rulers, not without rules. What gives rulers the ability to determine the lives of billions of people across the world? Inequalities in power and wealth. So the anarchist struggle revolves around the struggle to devolve or share power, possibly through direct democratic means, and the struggle to hold wealth in common and use it for the common good. That's what it's all about. Very simple concepts. You don't need a PhD in philosophy or anything else. Simple concept, inequalities in power and wealth, and the struggle to share power, hold wealth in common, and use it for the common good. Exceptionally conservative concepts in comparison to what we see around us when we love to give authority and power to people who appoint themselves, who we elect, religious, gurus, and the list goes on and on. Traffic. I know this sounds a bit boring, but just stay with me. Now, when you're wandering around the streets, whether you're walking or in a car or on a bicycle or one of those skateboards, or who knows what it is. You've got one-way streets, you've got two-way streets, you've got four-lane highways, six-lane highways. There's a variety of roads. Unfortunately, when it comes to politics, and when I talk about politics, I'm not talking about parliamentary politics. I'm talking about the polis, the people. That's what politics is about. The ideas which circulate constantly and which are a little bit like the air we breathe, we don't even seem to realise it in many situations, is the fact that we live in a capitalist society. That's a private investment for private profit society. And every human interaction and non-human interaction is, rests on this principle. Private investment for private profit. It's our mantra. It's our mantra. It's our religion. It's our way of life. One-way traffic. Down a one-way street. And we're told consistently at all levels, whether it's personal discussions, whether it's social media, or whether it's the legacy media, we're told consistently It's the only way. It's the only effective way to create a harmonious, prosperous society. Well, that's the propaganda. Yeah, it is propaganda. Unfortunately, in this country, that's all we seem to have, one-way traffic. I mean, look, if there's one thing I am, I'm over 70 now, is realistic. I've been doing the Anarchist World this week. I think this is the 47th year. I'm very realistic. It's the fact that programs like this are irrelevant. They only get across to a few people. The fact is that the majority of people formulate their opinions on what they hear and see. So it's not unusual that public opinion, in many regards, basically reflects the ideas that people are exposed to every second of every minute, of every hour, of every day, of every week, of every year. And those ideas are that we need, that's right, need, not want, but need to support the very system which in many ways oppresses most of us. Now, I don't hold to a traditional class analysis, working class, ruling class, all that stuff. I mean, class has changed. And what we have in Australia is basically 4 classes, and it's not related to the type of work you do. You have the ruling class, the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, whose power and wealth has exploded, that's right, exploded over the last 4 decades during the deregulation, privatisation, globalisation, corporatisation era that we are experiencing. I mean, their power and wealth is extraordinary. 1% of the population in Australia owns 40% of the wealth, and 30% of the population owns 1% of the wealth. Just extraordinary. Extraordinary. And we are supposedly a democratic, parliamentary democracy. Let's not use the word democratic, but a parliamentary democracy. So, why do we find ourselves in this situation? And we find ourselves in this situation because the means of communication, that's the key, the means of communication, whether it's the legacy media or social media, are heavily weighted to a private investment, a private profit ideology. Because that's what it is, it's an ideology. It's not an economic fact, it's an ideology. That mammon is our God, the only God that has any significance in most people's lives. And the dilemma is that we have now become totally incorporated in this system, and it's happened in a variety of ways. Obviously, when you have a private investment for private profit ideology, what happens is that not everybody benefits. And as I'll go back to this idea of this different class analysis, it's really a variation. The 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange, communication. Then we have 8% of Australians who have done extraordinarily well during the deregulation, corporatisation, privatisation, globalisation era, with a little bit of help from parliamentarians who've passed laws which give people who've got disposable income at the end of the week advantages in terms of taxation, negative gearing, shareholders, tax deductions, the list goes on and on. The fact is that we have made it a paradise for people who have disposable income. Now, in the good old days, in inverted commas, which were the bad old days, professions or occupation determined whether you had disposable income or not. But today, it's different. The amount of disposable income you have is not linked to profession. Many people who don't work in the medical finance field are part of that group. And many people who work in the medical finance field are not part of that group. So you can't kind of determine class by occupation. Obviously, occupation does give you advantages. But at the end of the day, the ones who have done really well over the last 40 to 50 years during this epoch of capitalism have been those with disposable income, with the assistance of parliamentary legislation, which gives somebody a tax deduction for owning more than one home or a tax deduction for owning stocks and shares. Then you've got the great mass of workers who are basically wage earners, and their very existence depends on having a job. We're looking at about 50 to 60%, about 60% of the population. And then you have the 30% of Australians who rely on social security benefits to survive: the elderly, the sick, the unemployed, single parents, and the list goes on and on. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is not only the demonisation of this particular group of people, but the fact that their living standards have markedly fallen behind because of privatisation policies which have, in many regards removed basic necessities, removed, public housing, removed fixed prices for essential services with the privatisation of essential services. So what we've seen as an inversion in society, and what I mean by an inversion is, instead of the state through Parliament passing legislation which improves the lives of that 30%, what we've seen is legislation has been passed over and over again which improves the lives of the 1% and the 8% who have disposable income, who can actually, take advantage of these finance-friendly laws. So no wonder, from a population of 26 million, we have 1 million children living in poverty in this country. And we have private charities raising money to send Australian kids to public schools. So, big problem. But the problem is, public opinion is not moulded by reality. Because what people hear and see every minute of the day is about how wonderful a private investment for private profit ideology is. That in many regards we create opinions in the public sphere which reinforce those ideas. It's no accident the Murdoch family continues to fund The Australian, a paper which has never made a profit in the last 60 years. Because although people tend to deride the legacy media as something of the past, the reality is that the rest of the media, including social media, take its lead every day from the legacy media. What is in those newspapers, which are owned by a handful of corporations and individuals, is what is the debate the next day, including the debate in the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. And that moulds public opinion in a particular way. At the same time, through technological innovation, we've seen the de-radicalisation of the media. There are very few media outlets, including social media, which have a radical agenda which is not based on identity politics or religion or nationalism. What we have now is a media whose main focus is to reinforce the status quo. We don't see a variety of media. For example, during the Eureka Rebellion, and this year we celebrate the 170th anniversary of the Eureka Rebellion, during the Eureka Rebellion, in a population of 30,000 in Ballarat, there are 4 papers, 4 independent papers, and 3 of them supported the rebels. And after the Eureka Rebellion was crushed on the 3rd of December 1854, independent newspapers across Victoria came to the aid of the Eureka rebels, something you would never see in the media today. For example, currently there are 2 Extinction Rebellion protesters spending 8 weeks in prison in Victoria because they stood on a truck and partially blocked traffic on the Westgate Bridge. Now, the reaction to what they did has been almost universally negative. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a one-way street. Anything which interferes with the creation of profit is not even discussed, let alone raised. Those ideas are not raised. So during this era, what we have seen is the predominance of a system which is supported, or has been supported to date, by a significant number of people in this country because of the way public opinion has been moulded. And that moulding occurs because alternatives are never mentioned, let alone discussed. For example, everybody now talks about the fact that having private assets controlling essential services is a good thing. Although people complain about the prices and the problems, they still think it's a good thing. We've got the idea that public is bad, private is good, that anything that is public is bad. This is what public opinion has been moulded to think about, because in many regards, many of the public services which are still around, and there aren't many, like public education, public health, are grossly underfunded because so much of the resources that are collected via taxation go into private profit pockets. The problem isn't, as we saw with, robo-debt, that illegal strategy, and it was a strategy, they knew it was illegal, to demonise, ostracise and marginalise people on social security benefits as bludgers and thieves. Not one person has been prosecuted, let alone been charged. Just extraordinary, though people committed suicide. It's an extraordinary situation. But again, It's about public opinion and how public opinion is moulded. So think about it. There are alternatives to capitalism. There's a concept called a mixed economy, when you have the private sector competing with a strong public sector, competing with a collectivist, cooperative model, where you've got three different types of economic systems competing against each other. That naturally brings down prices. For example, why do you think we have this housing crisis? Now, obviously, there is a lack of houses for people. But why do we have this lack? Because we have left housing almost solely to the private sector through the privatisation of the public housing sector. If you had a strong public housing sector, you wouldn't need so many people to compete to rent or buy. Extraordinary. So think of this one-way street you're walking down. Now, the thing about one-way streets is occasionally there's a little side street. Isn't it about time that you raise these issues with the people around you? Because public opinion is not just moulded by the people who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Public opinion is also moulded with the types of conversations we have. Not just in terms of Zoom technology or the net or click activism, but in terms of one-to-one communication. There are alternatives. We need to discuss these alternatives, like the road system we have, where you go from a one-way road to two lanes and then 3 lanes and 4 lanes. The fact is we need the same type of discussion as far as what is possible and how best to tackle many of the issues we see today. Now, you may think it's hard. Well, change is always hard. But it starts with a conversation. You don't need to pay for a conversation. You need to be able to put doubt in people's minds about what is happening. And if you look at every available statistical indicator, you know, and I know, that, attaching our chariot or trolley or sledge to the private investment or private profit model only benefits a minority of the population. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. I'm afraid we've got to walk two extra kilometres today. Remember our little chat we have about the Gaza carnage? I don't use war, This is carnage. This is not war. And the civilian casualties are just extraordinary. Remember last week we walked, I think, 30.5 kilometres, and for every metre there was a body of a Palestinian. Well, today we're going to take a 32-kilometre walk. And every kilometre there's going to be a body of a Palestinian. Mainly men, mainly women, children, old men. If you're really lucky, maybe every 100 metres, 200 metres, you'll see a body of a Hamas fighter. I mean, that's the reality. You think about it. When was the last time you walked 32 kilometres? Think of where you're living. Think of how far 32 kilometres is concerned. Think about taking that walk, and every metre, not kilometre, every metre there is a body. And they call this war. Now, obviously, things are beginning to change as far as the fascist Israeli government is concerned. It is a fascist government. I mean, what it has done and what it is doing in response to the horrors of the 7th of October is extraordinary. When you think about the damage, and we are still getting, obviously, pictures out of Gaza, the wholesale destruction of cities with bulldozers, you can actually understand how difficult life has become for people here. It's not just a matter of starvation, enforced starvation. It's not just a matter of 32,000 dead. It's not just a matter of whole cities being levelled. It's a matter of humiliation and degradation. That's what it's about. It's about trying to use force to resolve an issue which occurred when the State of Israel was created and the Palestinians were thrown out of their homeland. Now, the irony of it is just extraordinary. Currently we're seeing Nicaragua take Germany to the International Court of Justice because it is one of the main weapons suppliers outside the US to the Israeli state. Think of the irony. The Palestinian people are paying the price for 2,000 years of European anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. They have been asked to pay the price, and they are paying that price. And at the same time, the very nation state which was responsible for the Holocaust is now arming the Israeli state, which is creating its own version of the Holocaust in the Gaza Strip. The irony is just extraordinary. At least in Australia, in political circles, we are beginning to see a little bit of movement. A little bit of movement. The Prime Minister is beginning to say a few words. The United States government is beginning to say, look, this is not very good for us, you know. And Mr. Biden is looking at his election prospects diminish as he fails to pull in the fascist Israeli government. That's the reality. Hopefully next week our little walk won't be any further than the 32 kilometres we've walked today. Now, talking about forgotten independent struggles, how about West Papua? Although Mr Albanese and the Labor government, not the opposition obviously, is beginning to make the right noises about recognising the fact that Palestinians need their own state, and the way to get security in this region is for the creation of a Palestinian state, we don't hear one word from these people about the West Papuan independence struggle, which has been going on now for over 60 years. Independence struggle by Indigenous people whose population is just over 1 million. Over the last 60 years, over 500,000, that's 500,000 West Papuans, have died directly and indirectly as a result of that struggle. We still have guerrilla bands in the highlands resisting the Indonesian occupation of West Papua. We have one Indonesian soldier in West Papua for every adult West Papuan male. That's over 250,000. And the atrocities continue. And we continue, although West Papua is only 70 kilometres from the Australian coast, we continue to not only support but embrace Indonesian government and the election of Pro Bobo, you know, a man who has a very checkered history as far as war crimes are concerned in East Timor and West Papua, has there a new president. That's the beauty about public opinion, isn't it? So, what can we do? And this is one situation we can do something. Now, over the last 9 years, I've been the convener of the West Papuan Rent Collective. The West Papuan Rent Collective pays for the rent for an office in Docklands, which acts as a de facto embassy for the West Papuan independence struggle. Only one of 2 offices in the world. And for the last 9 years, we have been raising money to pay the rent. We have only one purpose, and that is the West Papua Rent Collective, to pay the rent to allow the West Papuan activists to conduct their independence struggle the way they see fit. Now, as I speak, a great supporter of West Papuan independence movement, Bishop Huggins, is speaking with the President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Dennis Francis, regarding placing West Papuan independence on the agenda for the United Nations General Assembly. Although the United Nations General Assembly asked for a fact-finding mission to enter into West Papua 10 years ago to see what was going on, the successive Indonesian governments have denied the United Nations entry into West Papua. And currently, West Papuan independence fighters are holding a New Zealand pilot who they're very willing to release to the United Nations representative. But the Indonesian government refuses to allow the United Nations to actually receive this hostage. Just extraordinary. So, how can you help? Well, guess what? This Sunday, that's the 14th of April, this Sunday, the 14th of April, it's West Papuan Open Day at the West Papuan office, and you are all cordially invited to attend. Lunch at 1 p.m, Papuan lunch, very nice lunch, followed by Dr. Jacob Rumbiak speaking about the change in the Indonesian presidency and the effect it will have on the West Papuan independence movement and the Melanesian Spearhead Group. And then that's at 2 p.m. and at 3 p.m. I'll be doing an auction to try to raise some more money for the West Papuan Rent Collective. Now, there's a number of ways you can help. And it does mean money. And although, you may have 2 cappuccinos a week, that's, $10. If you forego them, you've still got $3 left. If you join the Rent Collective, it's $1 a day. And if you want information on how to join the Rent Collective and you can't come to the West Papuan Open Day, you can always leave me a message on 0439 395 489, 0439 395 489. Now, if you do decide to come this Sunday, the 14th of April, what you need to do is you need to go to 838 and then walk around the back. That's where the meeting room is. That's where the barbecue facilities are. That's where the garden is. That's where the auction will take place. And if you can't join the Rent Collective, because $366 this year, because it's a leap year, is a bit too much, you can always buy something at the auction. Every dollar which is raised at the auction goes into the West Papuan Rent Collective account. And I can assure you, because I've looked at the figures, I look at the figures every few months, every dollar that's been donated to keep the office afloat, that's almost over $200,000 over the last 9 years, has gone to pay the rent. Now, obviously, if you're a rich investor, part of the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, who we never hear from, and you want to buy an office for the West Papuans, well, you're more than welcome, because that means that the West Papuan Rent Collective is no longer needed. But unfortunately, it's still needed. We still need new members. We're about 15 members short. It's $1 a day. It's easy to join. You can do it anonymously. And but more importantly, come along this Sunday, 1 p.m, 838 Collins Street in Docklands. Come along, meet the West Papuan activists, listen to what they have to say, have a look at the office, look before you buy. Maybe you're willing to forego 1.5 cups of coffee a week at your local cafe and become a member of the West Papuan Rent Collective. So it's a practical way you can help, because it gives the West Papuan activists, the refugees and asylum seekers, many of them who've now Australian citizens, the ability to conduct their independence struggle at all levels, whether it's in the Highlands, whether it's in the United Nations, at all levels. Because, like the Palestinian struggle, this is a struggle that's been going on for decades, over 60 years. It's a struggle that's resulted in 500,000 dead. It's a struggle which has got no publicity in this country, none whatsoever. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, a West Papuan supporter was killed in a bicycle accident in Darwin, and a politician, I've forgotten his name, he's dead now unfortunately, wanted to do a condolence motion for this in the Senate for this activist. This is not an unusual thing. But both the Liberal National Party, which was in power then, and the Australian Labor Party refused to hear the condolence motion unless the word West Papua was removed. And when you listen to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, occasionally there's a footage about West Papua, especially when it's about torture, You'll never hear the word West Papua. It's all about the Indonesian province of Papua. So this is a chance. We may feel impotent as far as the Palestinian struggle is concerned, although we're not. But people get that feeling because they can't practically assist. But at least in this situation, you can practically at least assist one of the few independent struggles that continues around the world, 70 kilometres from our doorstep. And let's not forget, we train their troops in counterinsurgency here on the Australian mainland. We fund the war, and we support the Indonesian government in its entirety as far as West Papua is concerned. You're listening to the Anarchist World This Week, broadcast across Australia via the Community Radio Network. I am looking forward to seeing you on Sunday. And just in case you're at a loose end tonight, which is Wednesday, Wednesday the 10th? That's right, Wednesday the 10th of April. And you want to learn more about issues that are here, we have a dinner, the Public Interest Before Corporate Interests has a dinner tonight at the Great Northern Hotel, which is the end of Rathdown Street, near the corner of Rathdown and Pigeon Street. It's the Brunswick end of Carlton, North Carlton. So 6 p.m. to 9 p.m, you pay for your own food and drinks. Unlike the West Papuan lunch, where I think you don't have to fork out anything unless you want to make a donation. Just like to remind Public Interest Before Corporate Interest members, and you should all be getting something in the mail. Yes, we still use the mail, though the stamps have gone up to $1.50. That on Saturday, the 4th of May, which is just around the corner, from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m, we'll be holding a PIPSI Membership Congress at the Melbourne Unitarian Peace Memorial Church, 110 Grey Street, East Melbourne. If you want to learn more about it, go to their website, pibci.net, pibci.net, and I'm the registered officer for public interest before corporate interests. And if you wish to raise issues, I'm always happy to talk to people regarding membership. It's easy to join. You can join online. You just go to pibci.net. And if you don't like computers, which is understandable, we can always give you a paper form. That's right. A tree has sacrificed itself so you can join public interest before corporate interest. Let's move on. It's fascinating, it's fascinating. Interest rates are fascinating because there's been 13 interest rate rises, and everybody talks about mortgagees, but you've also got to remember interest for business. There are many small businesses and rural people who've got business loans, as well as people paying mortgages. And the fact is, 13 interest rate rises has had a profound impact on people's capacity to save and pay. And we tend to think that somehow we've got the best banking system in the world. It's stable. If you've got disposable income in the bank, there is a bit of a government guarantee up to $250,000 if they go bankrupt. But see, Australian banks have an extraordinarily bad, evil history. The Royal Commission into Banking highlighted how corrupt and how many illegal ways they used to maximise their profits at your expense. And every year, especially during COVID-19, their profits jumped because we don't really have any competition in the banking sector. Even what's called the fifth biggest, smallest bank, Bendigo Bank, there's very little competition because the rules under which the banking sector works seem to be the same all over Australia, irrespective of what bank you go to. For example, mortgages. Do you know that in the United States of America, the home of the private investment for private profit model, the fact is they have more protections than we ever have in this country? It's simple. If you take out a mortgage, you can take out a fixed rate for the next 30 years. So interest rates variations have no impact on your lifestyle because you've got a fixed rate for the life of that mortgage. In this country, if you do a fixed rate, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years maximum. And the fact is that 80% of Australians are on a variable rate. So every time an interest rate has gone up, their repayments have gone up. So Australians don't actually have the luxury, that's right, the luxury of fixing their rate for a long period of time. That means the banks make a bigger profit, constantly make a bigger profit at your expense. Then it gets even better. In the United States of America, if you can't keep up with your mortgage payments, you can leave the keys on the kitchen bench and say to the bastards, sorry, mate, I can't keep up my mortgage repayments. And the fact is that bank cannot pursue you for more than the property is worth. For example, in this country, if you take out a mortgage and you're forced to sell because you can't actually keep up with the mortgage repayments, and the amount of money you get for that property is less than the money you owe the bank will pursue you to eternity till you're bankrupt for you to pay that extra. Well, they can't do that in the United States. And this is because of legislation. This is not some type of revolutionary blood in the street activity I'm talking about. This is simple legislation. Simple legislation. Parliament, in its wisdom, could pass legislation to force banks not to chase people if they lose on a particular, mortgage, or force banks to give people 30-year fixed rate. But no, we believe in free enterprise amongst monopolies. Although I've noticed that the government is now talking about introducing laws to protect people regarding mergers, and it was really funny, wasn't it? It was really funny recently when the interim report on the supermarket giants suggested that we have a mandatory rules regarding them fleecing their suppliers and their customers. And they said, we're not happy. We're not happy. We don't want mandatory rules. We want self-regulation. We want to be the fox in the chook pen. That's right. We want self-regulation. Fox in the chook pen. Could you imagine an organisation which is based on a private investment for private profit ideology self-regulating? Come on. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Now, it'd be interesting to see what the Liberal National Party will be doing when they talk about mandatory laws regarding protecting suppliers and, to a lesser degree, protecting customers. I can imagine they're going to throw up their hands in horror and say, not happy, Tom? Not happy? Not happy? It's extraordinary, isn't it? Every time the Labor Party and the Greens try to do something to rein in the private investment for private profit mob, the Liberal National Party jumps up and down with their friends in the corporate media, jumps up and down telling us it's the end of civilization as we know it. It's all about free enterprise. Well, it's not about free enterprise, boys and girls. It's about monopoly enterprise. Monopoly enterprise. And that's what we've seen. And changing merger rules regarding monopoly enterprise and having mandatory regulations for corporations in terms of the way they act are essential. But no, not with the Liberal National Party, no. We all know who they support. But again, they're the party of free monopoly enterprise. That's the key. Free monopoly enterprise. Smart meters. I remembered when smart meters were introduced, people were saying it's going to kill me, there's going to be radiation, there's going to be that. Well, that's not the problem with smart meters. People are now beginning to see the problem with smart meters. The problem with smart meters is the company, the privately owned company, because they're not publicly owned, the privately owned company which supplies you your electricity or gas now has ultimate power in terms of the way it charges you for your use of your electricity and power. That's what the smart meter is all about. It was about obviously decreasing the need to have meter readers, but increasing their capacity to structure the plan you are on to maximise their profits at your expense. Now, if you look at your electricity or gas account, you'll notice that at particular periods of the day, you pay much, 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 much more, sometimes double the amount than you pay at other periods of the day. And guess what? Guess what, boys and girls, and the people of South Australia have now realised, because now they've been charged according to their smart meter. Guess what? You pay more between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. and 10 p.m. than you do at other times of the day. And why do you pay more? Well, because a lot of people are at home at that particular point in time, getting organised to become wage slaves, getting organised to send the kids to a poorly funded public school. And obviously, now that they've got a smart meter, they can actually determine exactly what time you use that electricity. So instead of having a fixed charge, you have various charges for various times of the day, not to assist you, but to maximise their profits. That's the way it works. All right, let's move on. Just a little aside, just in case you didn't know. I'm sure you all knew, but if you didn't know, have a look at your next electricity bill, and even if it's sent to you virtually, have a good look at it and just see how the rates change depending on the time of the day, and you'll be shocked to see the time of the day you need the most electricity is the time of the day that you're charged much, much more. The news cycle. Now, I want to talk about the news cycle because the news cycle has become the new disease. The news cycle, in inverted commas, and remember news is about, in the majority of cases, to sell advertising, because most of the news that people see on the planet, or in this country, is private, privately owned. It's about getting your eyeballs on some advertising. It's about, as I said before, about fashioning public opinion to support the private investment for private profit model. Well, the news cycle has now become so dominant in thinking that politicians are no longer willing to talk about policies and introduce policies because they have one eye on policy and one eye on reaction. And the news cycle is so rapid, they're so concerned about the reaction of the news cycle, which is dominated by the private investment for private profit mantra, that it stymies attempts to change things. And that's why we continue to see what's happening in Alice Springs and other parts of the country where a lot of young people believe, and they know they have no future in this on the planet. So if you've got no future, you've got nothing to lose. So you're going to act out against society, not in terms of some sophisticated political analysis, but you're just going to act out because every minute of the day, you've got no future in this society. You've got nothing to lose. And to a significant degree, this is a creation of the news cycle. Because the news cycle inhibits political change to improve the lives of people. Think about the reaction in the news cycle if we talked about a basic income. Look at the reaction when, the trade unions wanted a 5% increase for the basic wage. Workers still taking home less than $880 a week. Look at the reaction of the news cycle in the Palestinian struggle, or the West Papuan struggle, or the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander struggle. Look at the reaction. How people keep looking, people who are supposedly in positions to make laws to improve your life and my life, who will never make these laws because they're too concerned about the reaction of the news cycle and the fact that how the news cycle moulds public opinion that turns black into white and white into black. It's a real issue, and that's why programs like the Anarchist World This Week are important, because we look at things in a different way. It doesn't mean the way we look at things is irrelevant. It just means it's a minority opinion. But it's minority opinions which change things in society. It's individuals standing up and people coming together and working collectively and cooperatively to highlight the inadequacies and then do something about changing those inadequacies, whether it's through extra parliamentary action or through parliamentary action. It makes a difference. But in the 21st century, we have forgotten that ultimately real power in a democratic society rests in the hands of an engaged public. Not a public that's disengaged, but a public that's engaged. Thank you for listening to The Anarchist World this week on your local community radio program. Don't forget this week, the West Papuan Wren Collective Gathering, 838 Collins Street, Melbourne. See you there. See you next week.
Evil minds that plot destruction, sorcerer of death's construction.
An analysis you'll never hear anywhere else. Anarchist World this week. Australia's sacred cow slaughterhouse. 10 a.m. every Wednesday. Listen to the Anarchist World this week for an up-to-date analysis of local, national and international events.
Poisoning their brainwashed minds. Oh, Lord, yeah.
Are you a 3CR subscriber?
We really need our listeners to subscribe to the station. It helps us remain financially independent and is an important part of our community governance.
It's just $40 concession, $80 waived, $150 for a band or organisation, and $300 solidarity.
Become a 3CR subscriber today.
3CR Radical Radio.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.